You said to me that you were expecting to like the songs and you didn't.
It felt like there were too many for a movie like this. I think it's probably just my history with you guys, with growing up with you and mom, and you guys watched a lot of musicals. I didn't love them the way you guys did, but
This movie is so much older than any of those movies. The King and I is like the beginning of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals situation. Well, the costumes are beautiful, the sets are amazing, and the music is not as great as some other Rodgers and Hammerstein for sure.
I found a lot of value in the movie itself, and I enjoyed the overall product. I would say yes, I liked it, just with some caveats. I looked forward to the end of almost every song. I thought was very interesting was it was the 1950s take on 1860s, on the
Yeah.
1860s.
All right, so let's tell the plot real quick. Anna Leon Owens, she's a widow, and she brings her son to Siam to teach English to the children of the king of Siam because he wants to make his country more modern, wants to increase international relations, basically.
And he's all about the science of
Yes.
things.
Yes, so his education, he wants to increase opportunities for his kids beyond their own country, which is in general an admirable thing. The idea that the only way to do that is to westernize his country is a viewpoint put on by the people who wrote this movie because they're Westerners. But
well, yeah, like the World War II had just ended, and the period of like Western dominance was really just super strong at that point. And the Cold War stuff, like the threat of the Cold War stuff, is just starting. Like,
yeah.
Well, maybe not has to be, but I think it was mostly inevitable that our movies are going to kind of reflect that.
Yeah, even
tenant.
movies of something that happened 100 years before that are going to have that viewpoint,
right.
Which is fine. It is a viewpoint, and it is a valid viewpoint, and there are also other valid viewpoints. But I mean, nothing good happens to her. She doesn't get to stay at the palace, I'm sure, or
she gets to hang out with the wives that are not in his favor.
Oh, that's so funny and so sad.
This movie was so interesting to me in terms of like the gender discussion. There's a lot of things of like, yeah, like women can be strong and powerful. And one of my very least favorite songs was because it wasn't catchy anyways, but then it was the head wife. She needs to go and advise the king. And she's like, he'll treat you terribly, but then he'll do one really cool thing and you'll love him, and he'll need love and you'll give him love. It's basically just excusing any level of abuse from him. You can't cancel one thing out with the other. It just doesn't. That sounds like the hallmark of an abusive relationship. It's like the guy punches his wife and then brings her flowers the next day. Like,
yeah,
that. Oh, hey, it cancels. No, it doesn't.
No,
right.
Is not unwilling to grow and learn.
Don't have an issue with him specifically. Yeah. I guess what I had the issue was that song. It basically just says, if you want to just distill it down into what it's telling society, hey, women, like if you have a guy who does horrible things to you and treats you poorly, look for those good, like a couple nice things that he's done for you too. And then it's okay. Yeah.
Get through it, yeah.
Yeah, like to me, that's what it was saying. Yeah. Hey, look, like it's okay. It's excusing like men and doing, treating their women poorly. In my, like, that's how I listened to it.
Yeah, I don't think
it made me cringe really hard.
So yeah, there's the feminist angle of this movie, which is really fun and interesting. And then there's also like a really interesting geopolitical foreign relations kind of concepts where he's really questioning his place in the world. And like, I thought that some of the stuff he said was just so wise and so good. And it's stuff that we're still talking about today. Favorite song besides the Shall We Dance song was like, starts out like, in my head are all these facts, like are many facts.
It's just like, him. That's the one song I really liked. I really did enjoy that one.
If my allies are all weak, doesn't that make me weak? Unless someone trusts someone else somewhere, there's not going to be anything left on earth. We have to start with trust somewhere. Right. And even though that's hard, it's got to be done, or else like we've got to be able to work together with our enemies and our allies.
Well, and he had some really clever lines, actually. He was like, or do I get a strong ally who will protect me right out of all of the things that I have?
I loved the costumes. And I mean, who wouldn't fall in love with a man that was going around bare chested like that all the time?
He's constantly just like flaunting himself, just like pulling back
throw open his shirt.
Yeah, shirt, just like
hands on his hips.
I thought that was super fun. I mean, for whatever reason, I just thought it was.
And he's an endearing person, you know, like even when he's being tough, you could see when his children are presented, he genuinely loves his children. He's a good dad. You could see the kindness in him, and so he's likable and you're drawn to him. And most leaders are charismatic, but like not all kings are charismatic, because a lot of times they just get handed stuff and they're petulant babies. And he's trying to be the best king he could be. He's trying to make good choices for his country and his children. And
one really interesting thing is that it happened at the same time that the American Civil War was happening, you know, and the whole slavery discussion was going on. And so it was the 1950s take on what an English person in the 1860s had on America and their slave war, or their Civil War. Because you have the lady talking about Abraham Lincoln, or what did he call him? Like Abraham Lincoln or something, you know, like you never said his name right. But hearing what the British thought of America back then and the Civil War and everything, you can't control your background. You can't control what you learned when you were a kid. Like you just can't. All you can choose to do is grow as an adult. And so, I mean, in some ways you're like, I can't really fault him for thinking he's always right, because he's been told that from day one. You can't fault him for having some of these like really fundamentally flawed assumptions. Like, I mean, you can obviously discuss how problematic they are and how it should, but you can see him changing. That's one of the beauties of this movie, honestly, is seeing him slowly just try to claw his way out of this pit of you know, like really awful beliefs and whatever. The way he treats people, it just slowly he starts ratcheting it in, and it gets better and better. And that's one thing I really enjoyed about this, is his character development. I don't feel like anyone else had character development, but his was enough, really. The ideal transformation from being a parent is of course, that they're parent and everything, but eventually if you're really successful, you kind of transition into being their friend as well. Once they're adults, and you become, it's never going to be just a friend relationship, because you've got all the history together. But when you're friends, you can exchange ideas as kind of like as equals, so to speak. I mean, you know, not that you're better than your kids or whatever anyways, but a lot of times your job is to instruct and to teach, and you know, slowly you're going to be learning from your kids. But I've always liked the idea of that as a parent. And similarly though, if you can, I think that the best teachers are going to be people who are able to learn from their students, from the process of teaching as well. So yeah, absolutely true. Otherwise, it's fun to watch these older movies because it gives you such a different snapshot. It's almost 70 years old, and so we get to see this perspective of, you know, like kind of the way the cultural values that we had, and the ways our society has grown in the last 70 years or whatever. And it's also just fun to see the old technology in use and stuff, like seeing some of the sets and stuff. The Adam Ruins the Movie, none of it's going to be about, some of the sets are like, there's very clearly just painted backgrounds sometimes, you know, like it's super fake. You're like, wow, that's not a tree, but that's fine. I thought it was charming, in fact.
It's more like a play in some respects that way.
Which I had no issues with. It was just like, oh, this is what they had to do back then to make movies. So I didn't like, I think that back then it was more value. The thing that really drove me nuts about the singing is just like her sing song, like opera-esque kind of. It just hurt my ears. It just really grated on me. And I think back then that was probably way more valued, though. That was perceived as the best way to sing. And now it's just, I hold different. I prefer what I know now. So
Right.
I can't even blame it for having music I don't like, because it was such a different period.
Yeah,
Not Bright and Breezy. She has many things, but Bright and Breezy is not among them.
That's like what she wants to be perceived as, but it's not her at all.
Yeah, you're like, wow, you're just not. And then
wow, you're pretty bright and breezy. Not.
Not.
You're pretty good. Not.
Yeah. What a brat. So good.